Welcome back to DIY Blacksmithing. Today we're going to cover a simple brass project that you can use to make money. Let's get into it. Using one 12-inch piece of brass that you purchased for $7, I'll show you how to create a pair of hooks I can sell for $30 to $35. Here are these exact hooks for sale in my Etsy shop, so you can verify. A couple different styles, 1 hole, 2 hole. If we click back to the back end here, you can see that these simple hooks have generated over $5,000 in revenue. And this is only to give you an idea of where you could take it. For 20 minutes of work, you would net $20 after Etsy's fees if you're selling there. $1 per minute is pretty great. Stay to the end of the video and I'll tell you where to buy the right size brass stock in bulk. Here's how to make the simple brass hook. First, cut your 12-inch brass stock in half, each piece equaling 6 inches. I'm just using a Sharpie made ruler on my bench top to mark off where 6 inches is. I have this ready to go, so I don't have to keep pulling out the tape measure. And we're going to clamp it in a vise. If you don't have a vise that will turn on its side, that's okay. You can do this with a regular standard vise. I'm going to use an angle grinder to make this cut. The other option, if you don't have an angle grinder, is to use a hacksaw. Perfectly fine, just takes a little bit longer. Since I have the angle grinder handy, I have a standard cutoff wheel in it. I'm going to go ahead and use that to make this cut. If I'm doing multiple hooks, I'll stack up the pieces of brass stock together so I don't have to make a bunch of cuts. The next thing we want to do is file off the rough edges with a hand file, or if you have one, belt sander or a belt attachment on a bench grinder. What we're trying to do is grind or file the corners and sharp edges down so they're smooth to the touch. This way they don't catch on articles of clothing or whatever people are going to hang with these hooks. It'll give us a much better finished product at the end. So in the video you can see me addressing the sharp corners. I'm going to turn it over here. You can look at the back and still see the visible burr. Get that clamp back in the vise for good leverage. And then just with forward motions, file that down until it's as smooth as you like. And since we have it, we're going to use the benefit of speed here with a multi-tool grinder attachment. This is going to shave off those corners and sharp edges pretty quickly. We're using I believe, worn down 60 grit belt on this to start to smooth out those edges. You want to be fairly careful that you don't grind away too much. We're not trying to make 1/2 of a circle. We're just trying to knock off some corners. So we're working at different angles and also running the edges of the hook underneath the flexible part of the belt. And again, this just gives us a nice finished product. Now we're ready to do some hammer work. You can use the flat space on the back of a vise for this if you don't have an anvil. We're working the brass cold, so you'll have good control over the piece if you need to work on a small surface like the back of a vise. I'm using a ball peen hammer here, and I apologize for the shakiness of the camera. What I'm going to do once I'm done chamfering these corners or kind of softening them is I'm going to flip the ball peen over and use the ball peen to lightly texture or kind of pebble the surface of it. What I'm doing is overlapping those blows, so it's kind of like stacked up pebbles on top of each other rather than leaving gaps in between. And it's up to you, whatever method looks better to your eye. And this part can take a little while to get the texture that you want. Pretty difficult to mess up, but take your time with it. I'm just slowly working my way up towards the top of this hook that will eventually get cut off once we decide on the overall length that we want. Okay, so now it's all textured up and you can see the light reflect off of it, giving it that nice pebbled look. The next step now is to take the ground end, so those softened corners and edges, and flare them out. And this is partly for the looks of it, but it's also to make it easier to bend that tip over the back end of the horn. And this will end up being the front of the hook, kind of the front lip that you put stuff over to hang it up. Okay, so you can see that flare there. Now we're going to carefully take about 1/4 inch of that tip that we just flared out over the smooth heel, rounded heel of the anvil, and hit down and in to create that little curve. In blacksmithing, this would be the scroll of it. Then we're going to take our hook blank that's almost all the way done. And I've got a handy jig because I do a lot of hooks here to make the bends happen. If you don't have a jig like this, you can use pieces of steel stock that are the diameter that you want, and just make sure that it's braced along that lip so you have some leverage on it. So now we're going to check our depth for the hook. I want these to be about 1.5 inches wide. These will be made to fit a 1.5 inch diameter boat oar. Next, we want to use our benchtop ruler, and we're going to measure out 3.5 inches tall, and this is how tall I want these sets of hooks to be. So I've got it braced, and I've got my fine point Sharpie there, and I'm going to mark off 3.5 inches so I know where to cut. We'll get it clamped in the vise, and you can either use a hacksaw, or you could use a Dremel tool even. We're going to use the angle grinder again because it's nice and handy. And we're going to cut off just that very tip, making sure to keep your hands steady, wearing hearing protection and eye protection. And I'm using the vise here to grab onto that little nerd and kind of tear that off. So we've got a clean top now. And then it's back to filing or grinding if you have that attachment that we talked about. So same as before, we're just trying to soften those edges and knock down those corners so we have a nice clean look once we're done with this. And it's small steps like this that make the biggest difference when you're making handmade products for people. You don't want them to catch their hands on any part of your product. And then adding a little bit of speed to it, we're going to use that belt attachment on the bench grinder to knock down those corners and smooth everything out. If you're interested in this attachment, leave a comment below the video and let me know. I'd be happy to do a video on it and talk to you about it, its various uses. All right, similar to before, we're going to flare out the tip of that. Not quite as much as we did with the end of the hook, but just to kind of make a match. Okay, you can see that chamfering that we've done. Okay, and we're back to the benchtop ruler here. We're going to use a 1/4 inch spacing to set where the hole is going to go, where we drill this out to fit a number 6 brass screw. Make a little mark there. I'm going to have it set up on the anvil portion of the vise. That's its technical name. I'm going to take a center punch, place it on that hole, and then give it one solid whack with a hammer to make that little indentation. Now we're going to bring it over to the drill press. This is a 5/32 inch drill bit. We're going to drill out that hole. If you don't have a drill press, you can use a hand power drill to do the same thing. You're just going to have to brace quite a bit, put some muscle behind it. See it punch through. We got that piece of trim underneath it as support. And now we're going to come back in and use a slightly larger drill bit to soften the edges of that hole and also to more or less countersink it slightly. And this goes back to our talking about the little details that make the biggest difference. So these finer details are what will set your products apart from others, because you took the time to look at it and do this. Okay, And now we're going to smooth out and clean out the back, clean up the back of those holes. Just the lightest touch. We're not drilling very far down at all. And as a final step for these brass hooks that you've made, we're going to take some 00 steel wool and give them a nice polish. This just brings out that shine. And keep in mind that brass will tarnish fairly easily. So when you're selling these, you might want to let your customers know that they will tarnish and fade a little bit over time, but it's pretty easy to get the shine to come back out of them. A little bit of steel wool and some elbow grease. Okay, here are two side by side, one a little more polished than the other. And that's it. Hopefully this gives you some ideas for making your own simple projects out of brass. Price them correctly based on your time, materials, and customer feedback, and you'll be earning money from your handmade hardware. Now, to buy your brass stock for this project, follow these easy steps. I'll also put them in the description below. So to buy your brass stock for this project, first go to diyblacksmithing.com/OM. That's Oscar Mike. That will take you to Online Metals, our supplier of choice. On the home page of Online Metals, you will enter these options: material, brass; shape, bar rectangle; alloy, 360; thickness, 0.125 inches. This equals out to 1/8 of an inch; width, 0.5 inches. Then you'll click Search Now. That will take you to a page where you can select the brass bar length you want. The best pricing when it comes to shipping is on 36-inch or 3-foot bars. They ship from multiple locations in the US, including Atlanta, Dallas, Seattle, and Toledo. And if you missed it, that information again is in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.